Right, let's just jump straight in. We're doing an explainer today on a market structure that honestly controls a massive chunk of our daily lives, even if it is notoriously tricky to navigate. You probably don't realize it, but from the actual car you drive to the literal cement building your house, you are constantly playing this high-stakes economic game called an oligopoly. Today, we're going to unpack exactly what that means, how the players operate, and why this specific market structure is considered, well, one of the absolute hardest challenges in all of economic theory. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. What is an oligopoly? 2. Monopoly versus oligopolistic firms. 3. The interdependence trap. 4. The urge to collude. And 5. The consequences of collusion. By the time we wrap this up, you're going to look at your next major purchase in a totally different way. Okay, Section 1. What is an oligopoly? Introducing the players. So before we really get into the game, we got to know who's sitting at the table. The defining feature of an oligopoly is that we're talking about a market structure with more than one, but typically less than 8 sellers. And each of these sellers commands a very substantial share of the market. We aren't talking about countless anonymous competitors here. No, this is a very small, highly exclusive group of players. They aren't just drops in the bucket, you know? They basically are the bucket. Because there are so few of them, the whole game is dictated by that small number. Each seller controls a huge chunk of the market, meaning every single move they make is felt by everyone else. It is fierce competition, serious rivalry. There's this constant looming fear that if you, say, lower your price to grab more customers, well, your rivals are just going to neutralize your move by lowering theirs too. You literally cannot make an independent decision about anything, price, output, whatever, without obsessing over how your rivals will react. We see this all the time in India, for example, in industries like automobiles, cement, steel, and aluminum. It's just a handful of massive firms watching each other's every single move. Moving right along to Section 2, Monopoly versus Oligopolistic Firms, the Rules of Power. To really get how an oligopoly works, it helps to contrast it with something simpler, like a monopoly. A monopolist is basically the solo king of the market, right? They wield unquestioned power. They make entirely independent decisions, which means they can easily construct their demand and cost curves to find that perfect sweet spot for maximum profit. But an oligopolist, totally different story. They are locked in this constant, exhausting psychological battle. They live with that constant fear of neutralization we just talked about. They are heavily dependent on their rivals' reactions. And because they can't predict what the other guys will do, they have an unbelievably difficult time arriving at their average and marginal cost curves. So while a monopolist is basically playing solitaire, an oligopolist is playing a very tense, high-stakes game of poker. Which brings us to Section 3, the interdependence trap, visualizing the chaos. This is honestly the most agonizing rule of the game, and it's what makes this whole structure such a headache for economists. There's a great quote from the source material that hits the nail on the head. The overriding characteristic of oligopoly is inability of a seller to take independent decisions. That's the interdependence trap in a nutshell. It means a firm is endlessly guessing. They have to guess actual reactions from rivals, and then assumed reactions, it just never ends. Because of this loop, the marginal revenue curve, which is how a business figures out its profit, becomes completely unpredictable. If you try to map this out, it's just endless guesswork. Say a firm starts with an original demand curve, little d, and an original cost curve, little c. They think they know exactly where they stand. But the absolute second they make a move, a rival reacts. Instantly, those original curves just vanish. The demand curve shifts to D1, the cost curve shifts to C1, you make a move, your rival reacts, and your perfectly planned projections just keep shifting endlessly. It's absolute chaos. Determining a stable equilibrium price and output under these conditions is pretty much impossible. So that begs a pretty massive question, right? How on earth do oligopolists survive this endless uncertainty? If trying to maximize your own individual profit just traps you in this chaotic cycle of shifting curves and threatens your very survival, what's the logical next move? That takes us right into Section 4, the urge to collude, breaking the rules. To survive the interdependence trap, these massive firms basically decide to take a totally different path. They just stop playing against each other. This is what we call collusion. It's an arrangement, could be formal, could be informal, where oligopolistic firms join together to entirely avoid competition. Rather than risking a brutal price war that destroys profits for everybody, they look around the market and say, hey, let's just act as one. By doing this, they concentrate market power and maximize their joint profit. In the real world, this collusion takes a couple of forms. Formal collusion involves explicit, Actual arrangements. Think of a cartel, like OPEC, where they formally agree on prices and market shares, or even a merger, where companies just literally combine. Notice the control here. In a cartel, companies keep their individual control, but in a merger, it's centralized. Then, on the flip side, you have informal collusion. This is a broad understanding, no formal document anywhere. A classic example is price leadership, where one firm, maybe the biggest or just a recognized leader, sets a price and everyone else just quietly follows along. No price war, no competition, just a quiet, very profitable agreement. But even when they do collude, it's not a perfect system. We call this the cartel flaw. Agreeing on a high price and sharing the market, that's the easy part. But policing that agreement, unbelievably difficult. Why? Well, human nature. There is always this inherent tendency for producers to try and outwit each other. Someone is always going to be tempted to secretly produce a tiny bit more or secretly lower their price just a fraction to steal a bigger slice of the pie. So even in an incredibly strong cartel, that tension is always bubbling right under the surface. Finally, Section 5, the consequences of collusion and the real-world impact. So what actually happens to the market and to us, the buyers, when these giant firms successfully bend the rules? Well, the aftermath is pretty stark. First, oligopoly output generally stops way short of the optimum production level. They intentionally restrict supply to keep prices artificially high. Second, these colluding firms actively try to keep potential new firms out. They literally build fortresses around their market. And third, through unmatched price fixing, they basically avoid the very concept of competition entirely. The ultimate result of all this maneuvering, it's a continuing idle capacity and a massive, massive waste of resources in the economic system. Factories literally aren't running at full capacity. Resources are squandered, innovation can be stifled, and the market efficiency we all kind of expect is completely bypassed, all in favor of maximizing profit for a select few. So, knowing all this, knowing that the rules are bent and resources are intentionally left idle just to keep prices high, how many hidden oligopolies did you interact with today? Seriously, from the smartphone in your pocket to the cement in your walls, I really hope this explainer leaves you questioning just how much of your world is decided behind closed, colluding doors. Thanks for joining me on this one, and keep your eyes open out there.